Darius Coleman stood victorious in Harrowville's courtroom, his evidence shredding Judge Marjorie Voss's corrupt reign, until 7 minutes later, she smirked from the bench, free, while he wore handcuffs, accused of bribery. The room spun. The jury gasped. How had this flipped so fast? It started as a simple case defending a black teen from a trumped-up charge. But Voss's venomous insult, "You'll never outsmart me, boy," lit a fuse. Now Darius's triumph was ash, his future caged. What had he missed? Before we unravel this, where are you watching from? If you stand for justice, hit like and subscribe for more explosive stories. What twisted her game? Darius Coleman rolled into Harrowville, Texas 3 weeks ago, tires crunching gravel, as he parked his beat-up sedan outside a diner that smelled of grease and stale coffee. The air hung heavy, 90 degrees Fahrenheit even at dusk, but the real heat came from the stairs, sharp as knives slicing through him from every porch and pickup truck window. He'd been summoned here by a desperate phone call, a mother's voice cracking as she begged him to save her son, Khalil Turner, a 17-year-old black kid nabbed for stealing a white man's truck. Darius stepped out, his scuffed boots kicking up dust, and felt the town's pulse, a slow throb of old money and older hatred that pulsed louder with every Confederate flag fluttering on rusted poles along Main Street. He'd seen places like this before, small towns where justice was a ghost story told to kids who didn't know better, but Harrowville felt different, heavier, like the weight of 30 years had settled into its bones. He grabbed his briefcase, the leather worn from a decade of battles against crooked systems, and headed to the jail, a squat brick building where deputies lounged with smirks that said they'd already won. Inside, Khalil sat hunched in a cell, his skinny frame swallowed by an orange jumpsuit, eyes wide with a fear that made Darius's chest tighten. The evidence was a joke, a grainy photo from a gas station camera showing a figure in a hoodie, no face clear enough to pin, and a witness, some old white guy who'd mumbled about one of them when pressed. Darius knelt by the bars, voice low and steady, promising Khalil he'd get him out, but the kid just stared at the floor, already half convinced the gavel had fallen. Back outside, Darius squinted up at the courthouse, a looming beast of limestone and arrogance squatting at the town's heart, its steeple stabbing the sky like a dare. That's where she ruled, Judge Marjorie Voss, a name whispered with equal parts reverence and dread, a woman who'd held court for 30 years with a grip so tight it choked out anything resembling fairness. He'd heard the stories on the drive-in, truckers at a rest stop muttering about her overburnt coffee, how she'd send a man to prison for jaywalking if his skin was the wrong shade, how she'd once laughed a black lawyer out of her courtroom for daring to cite precedent. Darius adjusted his tie, a crisp navy strip against his dark shirt, and walked the 3 blocks to the public library, a crumbling relic with flickering lights and a single computer that hummed like it was on its last breath. There, he dug into her past, fingers flying across sticky keys, pulling up old articles from the Harrowville Gazette, yellowed scans of trials where defendants vanished into the state pen on flimsy charges, where appeals mysteriously died before they reached a higher bench. One story stuck, a 1989 case where a black farmer lost his land to a developer after Voss ruled against him on trespassing, the same developer who'd bankrolled her election that year. Whispers online called her untouchable, a queen in a kingdom of her own making, her silver hair and icy blue eyes a fixture in every nightmare this town could conjure. Darius leaned back, the chair creaking under his 6-foot frame, and felt a spark ignite, the kind that had driven him through law school after his own brush with a rigged system at 19, when a cop planted weed in his backpack and nearly stole his future. He'd beaten that charge, clawing his way out with a public defender who believed him. And now he carried that fire everywhere, a quiet fury that burned hotter with every injustice he saw. Back at the jail, he met Khalil's mother, Tanya, a wiry woman with hands rough from cleaning houses, her voice trembling as she handed him a photo of her son, grinning at a track meet, all lanky limbs and bright teeth. She told him how the truck's owner, a beefy white guy named Carl Hensley, had pointed at Khalil from across the street, no hesitation, like he'd been waiting for an excuse. Darius nodded, promising her he'd fight, but as he left, He caught a deputy's radio crackle with Voss's name, a casual mention of keeping things clean. That night, alone in his motel room, a squat box with peeling wallpaper and a mattress that sagged like defeat, he pored over the case file, the photo, the witness statement, all of it screaming setup. He traced Hensley's name to a construction firm tied to the same developer from 1989, a thread he tucked away for later. Then he hit the streets asking questions at a barbershop where old men played dominoes, their voices dropping to hushes when he mentioned Voss. One guy, a grizzled vet with a limp, leaned close, breath sour with whiskey, and said, "She don't just judge, she owns. You push her, you bleed." Darius thanked him, slipping a 5 across the table, and walked out into the humid night, the stars blotted out by clouds that felt like they were pressing down, warning him. The next morning, he filed into the courthouse for Khalil's arraignment, the air inside thick with sweat and tension, wooden benches packed with townsfolk who eyed him like he'd wandered into the wrong church. Voss perched on the bench, her silver hair pulled into a bun so tight it could have snapped steel, her glasses perched low so she could glare over them, a predator sizing up prey. Khalil shuffled in, head bowed, and Darius stood, shoulders squared, meeting her gaze. She didn't flinch, just let her lips curl into something that wasn't quite a smile, a silent promise that this wouldn't end well. The prosecutor, a twitchy kid fresh out of law school, rattled off the charge, felony theft, and Darius countered, voice steady, laying out the holes, no fingerprints, no clear ID. Voss cut him off with a sigh, her eyes locking onto Khalil like he was dirt on her shoe, and said, "Plea or trial, boy?" The word hit Darius like a slap, but he swallowed it, filing it away. "Trial," he said, and she nodded, slow and deliberate, like she'd been hoping for that answer. As he left, he caught her watching him, not the kid, not the case, just him, and he knew then this wasn't about Khalil anymore. It was personal. Back at the motel, he cracked open his laptop, digging deeper, chasing those whispers of rigged trials, pulling records from dusty archives online, piecing together a pattern. Black men locked up, white men walking free, Voss at the center every time. He found a name, a clerk who'd quit in '95, claiming she'd seen Voss shred evidence, and tracked an address to a trailer park 30 miles out. That was his first move, his first mistake, stepping into her web without knowing how. Deep it ran. He grabbed his keys, the night pressing in, and drove, the road stretching dark and endless, unaware that in Harrowville, pushing back didn't just mean fighting a judge, it meant waking a beast. Darius Coleman strode into Harrowville's courthouse the next morning, his briefcase swinging with purpose, the air inside thick with the stale scent of varnish and whispered gossip. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of a packed gallery, townsfolk craning their necks to watch Khalil Turner's hearing unfold, their murmurs buzzing like flies over a fresh kill. Darius adjusted his tie, crisp against his dark skin, and stood beside Khalil, whose borrowed suit hung loose on his lanky frame, the frayed cuffs a silent testament to a system that never fit him right. The prosecutor, a nervous kid named Ethan, Pratt with sweat beading on his pale forehead, fumbled through a stack of papers, laying out the flimsy case, a blurry photo, a shaky witness, nothing concrete. Darius stepped forward, voice steady as steel, and dropped his first bomb, time-stamped footage from a gas station 5 miles south of town, showing Khalil pumping gas at the exact moment Carl Hensley's truck supposedly vanished. The screen flickered to life on a rickety projector, the grainy image cutting through the room's haze, Khalil's face unmistakable under the fluorescent glow. Whispers rippled through the crowd. A juror with a gray beard shifted in his seat, squinting at the proof. Darius locked eyes with Judge Marjorie Voss, perched high on her bench, her silver bun gleaming under the lights, her glasses perched low so she could peer over them with a gaze that could freeze blood. What did she see in that moment? A threat? A nuisance? Or just another black man she'd crush under her heel? She didn't blink, didn't flinch, just waved a bony hand, dismissing the footage with a flick of her wrist. "Doctored nonsense," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to slice through the murmurs. "Any fool with a computer can fake that." Darius's jaw tightened, but he held his ground, pointing out the metadata, the unedited timestamp, the Gas station clerk's affidavit swearing Khalil paid in cash. Voss leaned forward, her lips curling into a sneer, and let the venom spill. "Your kind always thinks they can lie their way out," she said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, the word kind landing like a brick through a window. The gallery snickered, a low, ugly sound that crawled up Darius's spine, but he didn't waver, didn't let the heat rising in his chest spill over. Instead, he pivoted, voice calm but cutting, and filed a motion to recuse her, citing bias so blatant it should have been carved into the courthouse walls. "This court deserves impartiality," he said, "not prejudice wearing a robe." The snickers died. A woman in the back row clutched her purse tighter. Voss's eyes narrowed, a predator sizing up prey that dared to bite back. And then she slammed her gavel down, the bang echoing like a gunshot, the wood splitting with a jagged crack that made Ethan Pratt jump in his seat. "Denied!" she barked, her tone final, a queen refusing to be dethroned. Darius caught the glint in her eye, a promise of something worse than a lost motion, and as he gathered his papers, he felt the room tilt, the weight of her power pressing down like a storm cloud ready to burst. Court adjourned, and he walked Khalil back to the holding cell. The kid's shoulders slumped, his hope leaking out with every step. "She hates me," Khalil whispered, barely audible over the clang of the bars. Darius gripped his arm, firm, but gentle, and said, "She hates us, that's why we fight." He left the jail, the sun dipping low, painting the town in shades of blood and gold, and headed to his motel, a squat box on the edge of Harrowville, where the neon sign flickered like a dying pulse. He barely had time to kick off his boots when the night exploded, a crash shattering the silence as his window caved in, glass spraying across the faded carpet. He ducked, heart pounding, and saw them, 2 bricks thudding onto the floor, each etched with slurs so vile they burned into his vision, jagged letters spelling out "go back" and worse. He stumbled to the broken frame, peering into the dark, catching the taillights of a pickup peeling away, red eyes vanishing into the humid night. His pulse hammered, not from fear but from clarity. Voss wasn't just a judge, she was a warlord. Her courtroom a battlefield, her town a weapon. He swept up the shards, hands steady despite the sting of a cut on his palm, and sat on the sagging bed, replaying her words, that sneer, that gavel's crack. Who did she think she was, spitting? Venom like that in open court. Did she believe 30 years of terror made her invincible? He pulled out his laptop, the screen's glow casting shadows on the peeling walls, and typed up notes. Every detail of her insult, her dismissal, her glare, filing it away like ammo for the war he now knew he'd wage. The bricks sat on the dresser, a taunt, a dare, and he stared at them, mind racing. How far would she go to bury him? He'd pushed her, and she'd pushed back, not with law but with hate, raw and unrestrained. This wasn't about Khalil's case anymore. It was about survival, about proving a black man could stand in her kingdom and not kneel. He leaned back, the mattress groaning under him, and let the fire in his gut settle into something cold and sharp, a resolve that would carry him through whatever she threw next. Imagine sitting in that courtroom, hearing that insult rip through the air. What would you do? Drop a comment with number 1. If you cheer Darius on against this tyrant, hit like if you're rooting for justice to claw its way out of this mess, and subscribe to catch every twist of this fight. Picture those bricks smashing through your own window. How deep does that cut? What's Voss planning now that Darius has dared to strike back? Darius Coleman woke to the buzz of his phone vibrating on the motel nightstand, the cracked screen flashing with a text from Tanya, Khalil's mother. "They're talking about you on the radio." He rubbed sleep from his eyes, the sting of last night's glass cut still fresh on his palm, and tuned into a scratchy AM station where a gravelly voice dissected his clash with Judge Marjorie Voss. "Some lawyer's stirring up trouble in Harrowville," the host drawled. "Thinks he can take on the queen of the courthouse." Darius smirked, a flicker of pride cutting through the ache, and headed to the library, the air outside already thick with 95-degree heat that plastered his shirt to his back. He spent the morning hunched over that wheezing computer, chasing the thread he'd found tying Voss to Carl Hensley's construction firm, a hunch that hardened into gold when he uncovered a bank statement buried in a decade-old county audit. online, showing Voss pocketing $10,000 from Hensley's boss, a slick developer named Roy Grayson. The payment lined up with a ruling that handed Grayson a chunk of black-owned farmland, the same pattern he suspected in Khalil's arrest, a setup to clear land for Grayson's next project. Darius printed the page, the ink smudging on his fingers, and felt the weight of it, a weapon sharp enough to draw blood. By noon, he was back in the courthouse, the gallery packed tighter than before, the air humming with anticipation as he faced Voss again. Khalil sat beside him, eyes darting to the jury, 12 faces ranging from bored to hostile, while Ethan Pratt shuffled papers at the prosecution table, his tie askew like he'd slept in it. Darius stood, voice ringing clear, and laid out the gas station footage again, hammering its authenticity with the clerk's sworn statement. But this time he didn't stop there. He held up the bank statement, its numbers stark against the yellowed paper, and said, "Your Honor, this ties you to Roy Grayson, a man who's profited from every case like this one. It's corruption, plain and simple." Gasps punched through the room. A woman in the third row dropping her fan with a clatter, the grey-bearded juror sitting up straight for the first time. Voss's face paled, her lips parting just enough to show a flash of teeth, and for a split second Darius thought he saw her falter, a crack in the armor she'd worn for 30 years. He pressed harder, demanding a mistrial, his words slicing through the tension like a blade through silk. "This court can't stand on a foundation this rotten," he said, and the room held its breath waiting for her to snap back. She didn't. Instead, she adjourned, her gavel hitting softer this time, the split wood wobbling under the blow, and stormed off the bench, her robe billowing like a storm cloud retreating. Whispers erupted, a juror muttering to his neighbor, Ethan Pratt staring at his notes like they'd betrayed him. Darius turned to Khalil, whose eyes flickered with something close to hope, and nodded, a silent, "We've got her." Word spread fast, Tanya meeting him outside with a hug that squeezed the air from his lungs, her voice trembling with thanks. A new judge was assigned by afternoon, a wiry man named Harold Tate from 50 miles east, his glasses thick and his demeanor quiet, a stark contrast to Voss's iron reign. Tate took the bench that evening, his voice measured as he reviewed Darius's motion, nodding faintly at the bank statement, the footage, the holes in Pratt's case. Darius stood tall, 6 feet of defiance, and felt the tide shift, a rare taste of victory bubbling in his chest. Khalil might walk free, Voss might finally pay. The hearing stretched late, the clock ticking past 8, the air growing stale, but Darius didn't care, every second fueling his fire. Tate seemed poised to rule, his pen scratching notes, when the courtroom doors slammed open, a gust of hot wind sweeping in with 3 sheriff's deputies, their boots pounding the floor like war drums. The lead one, a bull-necked man with a scar slicing his cheek, held up a baggie, white powder glinting under the lights, and barked, "New evidence, Your Honor. Found this in the defendant's locker at school." Darius's stomach dropped, the room spinning as Tate's pen froze mid-stroke. Khalil gasped, a choked, "That's not mine," but the deputies kept talking, claiming a tip led them straight. To it, their story too neat, too timed. Darius spun on them, voice sharp, "This is planted and you know it." But Tate held up a hand, his face tightening as he ordered the baggie logged. Pratt, suddenly bold, jumped up, demanding Khalil's bail be tripled from 5,000 to 15, a number Tanya couldn't scrape together in a lifetime. Darius argued, slamming the table, "This is retaliation, not evidence." But Tate shook his head, voice flat, "Order must be maintained." The gavel fell, softer than Voss's but just as final, and Khalil was hauled back to his cell, the tea, hope in his eyes snuffed out like a candle in a storm. Darius staggered outside, the night air hitting him like a slap, and caught sight of Voss across the street, leaning against a sleek black car, her silver hair catching the street lamps. Glow. She didn't approach, didn't need to, just smirked, a slow, wicked curve of her lips that said she'd orchestrated it all. He clenched his fists, the bank statement crumpled in his pocket, now useless against this fresh blow. The deputies were her pawns, Grayson her bankroll, and this evidence her checkmate. He'd exposed her, humiliated her in her own kingdom, and she'd struck back not with words but with a trap that tightened around Khalil's neck. Darius paced the empty lot, gravel crunching under his boots, replaying the day, the gasps, the falter, the deputies' smug faces. How had they moved so fast? Who'd tipped them off? He'd won, hadn't he? The crowd had seen her sweat. Tate had listened. But now Khalil was deeper in the hole and Voss stood untouched, her power flexing like a muscle she hadn't stretched in years. He kicked a rock, sending it skittering into the dark, and felt the fire in his gut flare hotter, not dimming but sharpening into something dangerous. She thought this would break him, scare him off, but she'd misjudged him. He'd seen setups before, fought them, beaten them, and this one reeked of her. Fingerprints. Back at the motel, he patched the broken window with cardboard from a pizza box, the bricks still glaring from the dresser, and sat on the bed, laptop open, digging again. He traced the deputies' names, cross-referencing shifts, finding two. Had worked Grayson's land deals as security. Another thread, another weapon, but this time he'd be smarter, quieter. Voss had drawn blood, not just Khalil's, but his, and he'd make her bleed back. The night deepened, crickets chirping outside, and he stared at the ceiling, the taste of victory souring into ash, knowing this wasn't the end of her game, but the start of something uglier. She wasn't just a judge anymore. She was a machine, and he'd barely scratched its surface. Darius Coleman slumped on the motel bed, the cardboard-patched window letting in a sliver of dawn that painted the room in grey streaks, the bricks on the dresser still glaring like silent threats. His laptop hummed, screen glowing with deputy, schedules and Grayson's land deals, but his mind churned on Voss's smirk from last night, that slow curl of triumph as Khalil's bail tripled and the planted drugs sank their case deeper into the mire. He showered, the lukewarm water stinging the cut on his palm, and dressed in a fresh shirt, navy against his dark skin, determined to claw back ground. By 8, he was at Tanya's cramped duplex 3 blocks from the jail, the air inside thick, with the scent of burnt toast and desperation. She sat at a wobbly kitchen table, hands twisting a dish towel, her eyes red from a sleepless night. "They're killing him in there," she whispered, voice cracking like dry wood, and Darius nodded, pulling out the bank statement and the deputy connection, laying them out like cards in a losing hand. "We've got proof," he said, "but Voss doesn't play by proof. We need noise." Tanya blinked, then stood, resolve hardening her wiry frame, and within an hour they'd rallied Khalil's family, cousins, aunts, a dozen neighbors who'd seen the system chew up their own. By noon, 50 voices gathered outside the courthouse, a ragged chorus chanting "Free Khalil" under a sun that baked the pavement to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Darius stood on a milk crate, megaphone crackling in his hand, his 6-foot shadow stretching across the crowd as he roared, "This isn't justice, it's a lynching with paperwork." The words hit hard, fists pumping the air, a grandmother in a faded sundress wiping tears as she joined the shout. Cell phones popped up, live streams flickering to life, the crowd swelling as passers-by stopped, drawn by the raw fury pulsing through Harrowville's dusty heart. Darius felt the tide turning, a surge of hope he hadn't tasted since the bank statement rattled Voss, and for a moment he thought they'd break her grip, force Tate to see the setup for what it was. Then his phone buzzed, a call from Atlanta. Slicing through the noise, his sister Lena's voice trembling on the line. "Darius, the bakery's gone," she said, and the world tilted. "Fire took it all last night, everything we built." His knees buckled, the megaphone slipping in his grip, the crowd's roar fading to a dull hum as Lena sobbed, describing flames that devoured her shop, their family's lifeline, 8. Years of sweat reduced to ash in hours. No proof, no witnesses, just a fire marshal muttering electrical fault over the phone. But Darius knew, the timing too perfect, the wound too precise. He hung up, chest heaving, and stumbled back to the motel, the protest still echoing behind him as Tanya took over, her voice rising where his had faltered. Inside, he sank onto the bed, staring at the bricks, the cardboard, the laptop, pieces of a war he hadn't fully grasped. The door creaked open hours later, Tanya stepping in with a thermos of coffee, her face tight with worry. But he waved her off, needing space to breathe, to think. He hit the courthouse again at dusk, Tate's evening session dragging on, and faced Voss across the room, her silver hair glinting under the lights as she sat in the gallery, no longer on the bench, but still a spectre looming over every word. Darius stood, voice steady despite the hollow ache in his gut, and called her out again. "Your Honor, this case reeks of interference. Evidence planted, lives ruined, all tied to her." He pointed at Voss, the crowd shifting, a juror's brow furrowing. She didn't flinch, just leaned forward, her glasses catching the light, and taunted, "Family's fragile, isn't it?" The words landed like a punch, his sister's sobs echoing in his skull, and he froze, the room spinning as her smirk widened. He recovered, slamming the bank statement down, demanding answers, but Tate adjourned, rattled by the heat in Darius's voice. Back at the motel, he dug deeper, fueled by coffee and rage, and hit pay dirt, a taped confession from a former clerk, Ella Price, who'd quit in '95 after watching Voss shred evidence. He'd tracked her to that trailer park 30 miles. Hout drove there in the dead of night, the road a black ribbon under a moonless sky, and found her, a wiry woman with grey streaks in her braids, smoking on a sagging porch. She handed him the tape, voice low. "She'll kill for this, you know," and he nodded, pocketing it, a lifeline he could wield in court. He drove back at dawn, the cassette rattling in his glove box, a grin tugging at his lips as he pictured Voss's face when he played it, her reign crumbling under her own words. He parked, stepped out, and froze. The tape was gone, the glove box ajar, the motel door cracked open. His room was trashed, mattress gutted, laptop screen smashed, the bricks untouched but joined by a note scrawled in red ink. "You're next." His pulse hammered, the victory slipping through his fingers like sand. Voss's reach stretching beyond the bench, beyond the law, into his life, his blood. He sank to the floor, glass crunching under his boots, and realized she'd struck not just at Khalil but at him, personal, vicious. A blow that burned deeper than bricks or planted drugs. How far would she go to bury him? Could he claw back from this? Drop a comment with number 1 if you think Darius should have seen this coming. Hit like if you're raging at Voss's dirty game, and subscribe to see how he fights this monster. Picture your own family's dreams torched to ash. What would you do with that tape in your hands? What's Voss got up her sleeve now that she's tasted his blood? Darius Coleman sat amid the wreckage of his motel room, glass crunching under his boots. The red-inked note, "You're next," crumpled in his fist as dawn bled through the cardboard-patched window. The stolen tape gnawed at him, Ella Price's, voice silenced before it could sing Voss's sins, but he shook off the weight, splashing cold water on his face from a cracked sink, the sting waking him to the fight still burning in his gut. He grabbed his phone, the screen spider-webbed but functional, and dialed a contact he'd saved from a case 2 years back, a Dallas reporter named Sam Torres with a nose for corruption and a platform to blast it. By 9, Sam was on the line, voice gritty from too much coffee, listening as Darius spilled everything, the bank statement, the planted drugs, the bricks, the bakery fire, Ella's confession now lost. "You've got no tape," Sam said, "but I'll run the clerk's story. Give me her number." Darius handed it over, Ella's trailer park address still sharp in his mind, and by noon, Sam had her on record, her words typed up fresh. Voss shredded evidence, laughed about it, said black folks didn't deserve trials. The article dropped online at 3, Harrowville judge tied to corruption, screaming across the Dallas Post's homepage, and Harrowville erupted. Darius watched from Tanya's duplex, the TV flickering with shaky phone footage of 50 protesters swelling to 100 outside the courthouse, their chants rattling windows 3 blocks away. Someone lit a match, Voss's photo curling into ash as flames licked the edges, a roar rising from the crowd that drowned out the cicadas humming in the 98-degree heat. He stood on her porch, 6 feet of defiance, feeling the tide shift again, a public tide this time, raw and unstoppable. By dusk, he was back in court, Judge Harold Tate's session dragging into the evening, the air thick with sweat and tension as the gallery packed tight, townsfolk spilling into the halls. Khalil sat beside him, eyes sunken from sleepless nights, while Ethan Pratt fidgeted at the prosecution table, his notes a mess of scribbles. Darius had a new ace, a wiry ex-deputy named Calvin Reed, 52, with a limp and a conscience that finally broke. Reed took the stand, his voice gravelly but firm, swearing he'd seen Voss pocket cash from Roy Grayson in '97, a bribe to lock up a black mechanic whose shop Grayson wanted. The jury leaned forward, a woman with braided hair jotting notes, even Tate nodding faintly, his glasses fogging in the humid room. Darius laid out the bank statement again, tying it to Reed's story, his words sharp as he pointed at Voss in the gallery. "She's not a judge, she's a thief." The crowd murmured, a juror's jaw tightening, and Voss stormed out, her silver hair flashing under the lights, her robe swapped for a crisp blazer that didn't hide the fury in her stride. Ethan Pratt stammered an objection, but Tate overruled, his voice steady. "Let's hear this out." Darius felt it then, a rush like wind through a cracked dam. Khalil might walk, Voss might fall. The hearing stretched past 9, the clock's tick swallowed by gasps as Reed recounted dates, amounts, faces, every word a hammer against Voss's throne. Tate adjourned, promising a ruling soon, and Darius stepped outside, the night air hitting, his face like a bomb, Tanya hugging him fierce enough to bruise. "You did it," she whispered, but he shook his head, knowing Voss didn't break that easy. The streets buzzed, protesters chanting under street lamps, live streams hitting 10,000 views, the Dallas Post's article shared across Texas. He crashed at Tanya's that night, too wired to sleep, replaying Reed's testimony, the jury's faces, Voss's exit. Midnight brought a call that jolted him upright, Sam's voice tight. Reed recanted, took a payout, 50 grand, swore it was all lies. Darius's stomach twisted, the couch springs digging into his back as he cursed, the victory souring. Fast? Sirens wailed outside, red and blue flashing through the blinds, and he bolted to the window, heart pounding as deputies swarmed the duplex, boots stomping up the steps. Tanya shrieked as they kicked the door in, 4 men in tan uniforms, the bull-necked one from court sneering as he waved a warrant. "Darius Coleman, you're under investigation," he barked, tossing a stack of crisp $100 bills onto the table, 10,000 in cash they claimed they'd found in Darius's car. He stared, the bills pristine, no prints, but his own, a setup so blatant it mocked him. "This is Voss," he spat, but the deputy just grinned, cuffing him as Tanya lunged, held back by another cop. They hauled him to the station, the night blurring into a haze of steel bars and fluorescent buzz, the cash a ghost of Voss's hand reaching through the chaos. He sat in a cell, the concrete cold against his back, replaying the day, the article, the testimony, the crowd burning her face. She'd lost the street, lost the bench, and still she'd flipped it, her allies planting lies faster than he could dodge them. Khalil's case teetered, Tate's nod now a memory, and Darius's name was mud, the public triumph twisting into a noose. He clenched his fists, the cut on his palm throbbing, and thought of Lena's bakery, the bricks, the tape, every blow Voss had landed. How had she turned Reed? Who'd slipped the cash? He'd humiliated her, made her run, and she'd hit back with a precision that chilled him, not just at Khalil now, but at him, his freedom, his fight. The cell door clanged, a guard tossing him a stale sandwich, and he ate slow, the bread sticking in his throat, knowing this was her game at its peak, a machine grinding him down. He'd rallied a town, shaken her throne, and still she stood, smirking from the shadows, her power flexing through deputies and dollars. Back at the duplex, Tanya sobbed, the crowd thinning as news spread. Lawyers dirty, a lie that stuck like tar. Darius leaned against the bars, the fire in his gut flaring, not dimming, a vow forming in the dark. She'd pay, not just for Khalil, not just for him, but for every life she'd crushed. The night stretched on, crickets chirping outside, and he stared at the ceiling, the taste of victory gone, replaced by a hunger for something sharper, something final. She'd drawn blood again, deeper this time, and he'd make her bleed back, whatever it took. Darius Coleman sat in the Harrowville jail cell, the concrete wall icy against his back, the fluorescent buzz drilling into his skull as the stench of sweat and rust filled the air. Handcuffs bit into his wrists, the $10,000 implanted. Cash now, a chain tying him to a bribery charge that twisted his public triumph into a sick joke. The cell door clanged shut behind the bull-necked deputy, whose scarred cheek twitched with a smirk as he muttered, "Should have stayed in Atlanta." Darius's mind raced, replaying the raid on Tanya's duplex, the pristine bills spilling. On to her table, a setup so bold it screamed Voss's name. Khalil's family had turned on him, Tanya's voice cracking over the phone an hour ago. "How could you do this to us?" Her words cut deeper than the cuffs, their trust shattered. By lies he couldn't unspin, he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the stale sandwich from last night still heavy in his gut, and stared at the floor, cracked tiles staring back like a map of his broken plans. The guard, a lanky kid with a buzz cut, shuffled past, pausing, to whisper, "She owns us all," before darting away, his boots echoing down the hall. Darius's pulse quickened, not from fear but from a spark reigniting. Voss's reach wasn't just deputies and cash, it was fear, a web strangling everyone in this town. He'd been here before, 19. A cop's planted weed, nearly stealing his future, and he'd fought out then, he'd fight out now. By noon, a lawyer from Dallas, a pro bono guy Sam Torres sent, got him a hearing. And Darius walked into court, wrists free but spirit bruised, facing Judge Harold Tate's stern gaze. The gallery was half empty, the protest's fire snuffed. Out by whispers of his guilt, Tanya's seat cold and vacant. Ethan Pratt stood smug, waving the cash like a trophy. "He tried to buy the case, Your Honor," his voice steady for once, Voss's puppet strings pulling tight. Darius countered, voice hoarse but firm. "That's a plant, same as the drugs on Khalil." But Tate's eyes flickered with doubt, the weight of the frame-up pressing down. Then a janitor, a wiry black man with grey stubble, slipped him a folded paper during a recess, his hands trembling as he muttered, "Found this in her office." Darius unfolded it in the bathroom, heart pounding. A ledger listing payoffs to the sheriff, dates and dollars in Voss's spidery scrawl, 50,000 here, 20 there, a fortune built on buried lives. He smuggled it out, passing it to the janitor with a nod. "Get it to Sam Torres," and watched the man vanish into the crowd, a lifeline tossed into the storm. Bail hit at 10,000, scraped together by selling his car, and he walked free by dusk, the sun dipping low, painting the jail in shades of rust and despair. He crashed at a flop house 2 miles out, a rotting shack with a cot and a flickering bulb. Too broke for the motel now, the ledger his only weapon. He pictured it in Sam's hands, the Dallas Post splashing Voss's sins across Texas, her throne cracking under the weight. Then the call came at midnight, Sam's voice shaking. "They found him, Darius, the janitor Reggie washed up in the river, throat slit, ledger gone." The phone slipped in his grip, the room spinning as Sam added, "Cops say it's a mugging, but you know better." Darius sank to the cot, the bulb's flicker sinking with his pulse, Reggie's trembling hands flashing in his mind, a man dead for daring to help. He stumbled outside, the humid night pressing in, crickets screaming as he kicked the dirt, rage boiling over. Voss had struck again, not with bricks or cash, but blood, a murder to bury his proof. He walked back to the jail the next morning, 5 miles on foot, his boots kicking up dust, and demanded to see Khalil, who sat hollow-eyed in his cell whispering, "They think you sold me out." Darius gripped the bars, promising, "I'll fix this," but the kid just stared, trust gone. Court loomed at 10, and Voss was there, not on the bench but in the gallery, her silver hair a beacon of spite, her blazer crisp as she grinned, a predator savoring the kill. Tate took the bench, Pratt rattling off the bribery charge, and Darius stood, voice steady. "This is her doing, Your Honor. Every lie, every death." Voss's grin widened, her glasses glinting as she leaned forward, whispering loud enough for him to hear, "You're nothing here." The words landed like a blade, Reggie's blood staining them red, and Tate adjourned, unmoved, the ledger's loss a wound no one saw. Darius staggered out, the sun blinding, the town's pulse mocking him, every face a stranger now, the protest's echo silenced by betrayal. He'd had her, the ledger a dagger to her heart, and she'd turned it into a ghost, a man's life, snuffed out to keep her clean. Back at the flophouse, he sat on the cot, the bulb buzzing overhead, replaying Reggie's fear, Tanya's voice, Voss's grin. How had she known? Who'd followed Reggie? He'd pushed her to the edge, and she'd pushed back with a savagery he hadn't fathomed, not just framing him, but killing to win. The fire in his gut flared, not dimming but hardening, a vow to bury her, not just for Khalil, not just for Reggie, but for every soul she'd crushed. He lay back, the cot creaking, the night stretching endless, knowing she'd come for him again, harder, deadlier, and he'd be ready, whatever it took. Could you feel the sting of that betrayal, Khalil's? Family turning their backs. Drop a comment with number 1 if you'd stand by Darius through this mess. Hit like if you're boiling at Voss's bloody play. And subscribe to see this war explode. Imagine holding that ledger, proof in your hands, only to lose it to a killer's blade. What's your next move? How deep does Voss's web stretch now that she's tasted murder? Darius Coleman woke on the flophouse cot, the flickering bulb dead above him, the air heavy with mildew and the ghost of Reggie's blood staining his hands. He splashed tepid water from a rusted sink onto his face, the cut on his palm throbbing as he stared into a cracked mirror, eyes sunken but burning with a fire that refused to die. Voss had taken the ledger, slit Reggie's throat, turned Khalil's family against him, but he wasn't done, not yet. He grabbed his phone, battery at 10%, and texted Tanya, "We're not out. Meet me." By 9, he stood outside, her duplex, the sun clawing its way to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, sweat beading on his brow as she stepped onto the porch, her face a map of doubt and grief. "They think you're dirty," she said, voice low, but he held up a hand. "Then, we prove I'm not." She nodded, slow, and within an hour they'd rallied 100 souls, neighbors, cousins, strangers, who'd seen the Dallas Post article, all gathering under the courthouse's shadow, their voices a raw chorus shouting, "Justice now!" Darius climbed onto a pickup truck bed, megaphone crackling, his 6-foot frame towering as he roared, "Voss kills to keep power, but we're louder." Phones lit up, live streams buzzing to life, the crowd swelling as a barber with a limp joined. Then a teacher clutching a sign, "Free Khalil." The video hit 10,000 views in minutes, comments flooding in, the world watching Harrowville boil. Darius felt it, a surge like lightning through his veins. The feds had to notice now. Tate couldn't ignore this. By noon, he was back in court, the gallery packed, the air thick with tension and the sour tang of unwashed bodies. Khalil sat beside him, wrists cuffed, eyes hollow, while Ethan Pratt smirked across the room, bolstered by Voss's cash frame-up. Darius stood, voice steady, and dropped a new bomb, phone logs he'd pulled from a burner he'd bought, tying Voss to a number linked to Grayson's hitman, a shadow named Lyle Trent. "She's not just corrupt," he said, projecting the logs onto a screen, dates and times glowing stark. "She's a murderer." The room froze, a juror with braids gasping, Tate's glasses slipping as he squinted at the proof. Voss sat in the gallery, her silver hair a beacon of spite, her blazer crisp, but her fingers twitched, a crack in her steel facade. Tate hesitated, his pen hovering, justice teetering on the edge, and Darius thought he'd won, the logs a noose around her neck. Protesters clashed outside, their chants shaking the walls, 100 voices now a roar that drowned out the cicadas. Then Voss struck back, her lawyer, a slick suit named Victor Crane, rising with a sneer, "Your Honor, we have testimony." Roy Grayson took the stand, his beefy frame spilling over the chair, swearing Darius threatened him 2 nights ago. Said he'd burn my house if I didn't pay him off. Crane played forged texts, timestamps faked, Darius's number glaring on the screen. "Back off or you're ash." The jury shifted, the braided woman's pen stilling, Tate's brow furrowing as Pratt jumped up. "This proves his bribery." Darius slammed the table. "It's a lie fabricated like the cash," but Crane smirked. "We've got metadata," a slick forgery Voss had orchestrated. Tate bought it, his voice flat. Bails revoked and deputies lunged, cuffs snapping onto Darius's wrists as he shouted, "She's framing me again." The gavel fell, a dull thud, and Khalil's head dropped, his last shred of hope snuffed out. Outside, the protest turned ugly. Deputies in riot gear charging the crowd, tear gas hissing through the air, a grandmother collapsing as canisters clattered on the pavement. Darius glimpsed it through a window as they dragged him away, the chaos a mirror of his gut. Voss watching from her car across the street, her smirk a blade twisting deeper. He landed in a cell, the same concrete box, the buzz of fluorescence, mocking him as the guard, the lanky kid, avoided his eyes. The logs had her. The world saw it, 10,000 views and climbing, feds circling. But she'd flipped it again, Grayson's lie and Crane's texts a shield she'd forged overnight. He paced 3 steps one way, 3 back, the cuffs off but the weight heavier, replaying the rally, the logs, Tate's hesitation. How had she turned Grayson? When had she faked those texts? He'd rallied a town, shaken her core, and she'd struck with a precision that chilled him, not just at Khalil, not just at him, but at the crowd. Tear gas, a message to them all. Buckey. At the courthouse, Tanya gathered the scattered protesters, her voice hoarse over a megaphone. We keep fighting. But the live stream dipped, views stalling as doubt crept in. Is Darius dirty? He sank to the bench, the cold seeping into his bones, and thought of Reggie's body, Lena's bakery, the bricks, every blow Voss had landed. She'd lost the bench, lost the street, and still she stood, her allies a machine grinding him down. The guard tossed him a water bottle, plastic crinkling as it hit the floor, and he drank slow, the taste metallic, knowing this was her peak, a warlord flexing through chaos and lies. He'd exposed her hitman, turned the world's eyes on her, and she'd countered with a trap that snapped shut on his freedom. The cell door clanged, a shadow passing, and he leaned back, the fire in his gut flaring, not dimming, a vow hardening in the dark. She'd pay, not just for Khalil, not just for Reggie, but for every life she'd crushed. The night deepened. The jail silent but for his breathing, and he stared at the ceiling. The taste of triumph gone, replaced by a hunger for something sharper, something final. She'd drawn blood again, deeper, deadlier, and he'd make her bleed back, whatever it took. Darius Coleman paced the Harrowville jail cell, the concrete floor cold under his boots, the air thick with the sour tang of defeat as the fluorescent buzz drilled into his skull. The cuffs from yesterday's revocation still ghosted his wrists. Voss's forged texts and Grayson's lies locking him in this box, while Khalil's hope faded 3 cells down. He sank to the bench, the water bottle's metallic taste lingering, and replayed the rally, the phone logs, the tear gas, every move she'd turned against him. His phone was gone, confiscated, but he'd memorized a number, a lifeline from a case 5 years back, a retired FBI agent named Frank Delgado he'd saved from a wrongful rap in Memphis. He scrawled a note on a scrap of toilet paper. Frank, Harrowville, Voss, help, and slipped it to the lanky guard during a water run, whispering, $50 if you mail this. The kid's eyes darted, but he pocketed it, a flicker of greed outweighing fear. By noon, bail was denied again, Tate's voice flat over a crackling speaker. Flight risk, and Darius cursed, the cell walls closing in. 2 days later, a shadow loomed outside the bars. Frank Delgado, 60, with a salt and pepper beard, his fedora tilted low, voice gruff. Got your note. What's the play? Darius spilled it, the bank statement, the drugs, Reggie's murder, the logs, every blow Voss had landed, and Frank nodded. I'll dig into her finances. Sit tight. He vanished, leaving Darius with a spark, a chance, to claw back. Frank worked fast, hitting Dallas banks by phone, pulling strings from his old badge, and by week's end, he slipped word through the guard. She's got offshore accounts, millions. Darius grinned, a jagged edge of hope cutting through the gloom, and waited. The jail's hum his only company. Court loomed Monday, the gallery sparse, the protests fire doused by doubt. Tanya's seat empty again. Khalil shuffled in, cuffs clinking, while Ethan Pratt smirked, bolstered by Voss's lies. Darius's pro bono lawyer, a wiry guy named Paul, took the stand, playing a hacked voicemail Frank had unearthed. Voss's voice crackling through the room. Lyle, make it quick, no witnesses. The hitman's name landed like a bomb, tying her to Reggie's slit throat, the jury gasping. A man with a scar scribbling fast, Tate's glasses slipping as he leaned forward. Voss sat in the gallery, her silver hair a beacon of venom, her fingers curling into fists, and for a moment, Darius thought he'd won. The room frozen, justice teetering on the edge. Protesters lingered outside, 50 now, their chants faint but alive, a pulse he'd reignited. Then Voss struck back, Victor Crane rising with a sneer. "Your Honor, we have counter-evidence." A video flickered on. Darius's face, his voice. "I faked it all, the logs, the tape." A deep fake so slick it fooled Tate's eyes. The jury's gasps turning to murmurs of doubt. Crane smirked. "He's a con, not a crusader." And Pratt piled on, "Dismiss his claims." Darius lunged. "That's a lie, she's framing me again." But Tate banged the gavel, voice sharp. "Order!" The video's lie stuck. The T. Voicemail's truth drowned, and Darius's spark snuffed out. Hours later, the guard slipped him a note, Frank's scrawl. "Ambushed, alley off Main, bleeding bad." Darius's knees buckled, the paper crumpling in his fist. Frank's blood pooling in his mind, a fedora in the dirt, another life Voss had claimed. He staggered to the bars, shouting for the guard, who darted away and sank back, the cell spinning. Night fell and Voss appeared, her shadow stretching through the bars, her blazer crisp as she leaned close, glasses glinting. "Your hero's dead. You're next." Her voice was ice, her smirk a blade, and she vanished, leaving him with the weight of Frank's loss, the voicemail's failure, the deep-fake's sting. He punched the wall, the cut on his palm splitting wider, blood trickling as he replayed the day, the jury's doubt, Tate's gavel, Frank's note. How had she faked that video? Who'd tracked Frank? He'd slipped her a noose and she'd slipped out, striking with a savagery that chilled him, not just at Khalil, not just at him, but at anyone who dared help. Back in Dallas, Frank's body hit the morgue. Random stabbing, the report claimed, but Darius knew Voss's hitman had struck again, Lyle's shadow stretching from Reggie to Frank. He sat, the bench creaking, the fire in his gut flickering, not gone but dimming, a vow struggling to hold. She'd pay for Khalil, for Reggie, for Frank, for every soul she'd crushed. The jail quieted, the night pressing in, and he stared at the ceiling. The taste of victory ash replaced by a dread that gnawed deeper. She'd lost the bench, lost the street, and still she stood, her machine grinding him down, bloodier, deadlier. Could he claw back from this? Would anyone believe him now? Drop a comment with number 1 if you'd fight beside Darius after that deepfake gut punch. Hit like if you're seething at Voss's killer play, and subscribe to catch her next move. Imagine slipping that note, banking on a hero, only to find him bleeding out. What's left to throw at her? How does Darius strike back when she's turned his own face against him? Darius Coleman slumped against the Harrowville jail cell wall, the concrete biting into his spine, the air thick with the stench of rust and despair as the fluorescent lights buzzed like a swarm of angry wasps. Frank Delgado's blood-stained, his hands, not literally but heavier than the cut on his palm, the retired agent's ambush a fresh wound that pulsed with every heartbeat. Voss's deep-fake video had turned his own voice against him, the jury's doubt a noose tightening, and Khalil faced 20 years now, his hollow eyes haunting Darius from 3 cells down. The guard's last note, bleeding bad, crumpled in his fist, was a ghost of hope snuffed out, and her whisper through the bars, "You're next," echoed in the silence. His spirit cracked, the fire in his gut flickering, not gone but buried under a weight he hadn't carried since 19, when a cop's planted weed nearly stole his life. He sank to the bench, the metal creaking under his 6-foot frame, and stared at the ceiling, replaying the voicemail, the rally, Reggie's slit throat, every blow Voss had landed. How had he let Frank walk into that alley? Why hadn't he seen her coming? He'd pushed her to the edge and she'd pushed back with a savagery that broke him piece by piece. Morning came, grey light seeping through a slit window, and the lanky guard slipped him a USB, Frank's last act, dropped off, by a courier who'd bolted. "He sent this before," the kid muttered, darting away, and Darius clutched it, heart pounding. A lifeline from a dead man. He begged for a laptop. "Evidence," he rasped, and the guard, greased with his last $20, smuggled one in, a clunky relic that hummed to life. The USB clicked in, files loading slow, Voss's bank records glowing on the screen, millions in offshore accounts, dates tying her to Grayson, to Lyle Trent, to a dozen buried cases. Darius's breath caught, a grin tugging at his lips. Frank's, blood buying him a dagger to her heart. He hid the USB in his sock, the laptop confiscated, and waited, the jail's hum his only company. Court hit at 10. A chaotic hearing, the gallery half full, Tanya's seat cold, Ethan Pratt smirking as he waved the deepfake. Paul, the pro bono lawyer, took the stand, projecting the bank records on a jury-rigged screen, numbers stark. "She's funded by blood money," he said, voice steady. The crowd roared, a juror with a scar shouting, "That's her!" Voss screamed objections from the gallery, her silver hair wild, her blazer rumpled. "Lies!" But Tate banged the gavel, eyes wide, justice teetering again. Darius stood, voice raw. "This is who she is, a thief, a killer." The room erupted, protesters outside swelling to 70, their chants shaking the walls, a pulse he'd reignited. He thought he'd won, the records a hammer to her throne, Tate's pen scratching fast, the jury leaning forward. Then deputies stormed in, boots pounding, the bull-necked one barking, "Bomb threat, clear the room." Chaos exploded, chairs toppling, jurors scrambling. Khalil shoved back as Darius lunged. "It's a setup." Shots rang out, sharp cracks splitting the air, and Khalil crumpled, blood blooming on his chest, a stray bullet from the melee piercing his lung. Darius dropped beside him, hands pressing the wound. "Stay with me." But Khalil's eyes fluttered, breath shallow, clinging to life by a thread. The crowd scattered, deputies shouting, Tate vanishing, and Voss was gone, her shadow slipping through the chaos she'd unleashed. Darius was hauled to his cell, blood slick on his hands, the USB still in his sock. The record's useless now as Khalil flatlined in his mind. The jail quieted, the guard avoiding his eyes, and he paced 3 steps one way, 3 back, replaying the shots, the bomb threat, her absence. How had she staged this? Who'd pulled the trigger? He'd nailed her with millions, turned the world's eyes on her, and she'd countered with a trap that snapped shut on Khalil's life. Back at the courthouse, Tanya collapsed outside, her wail cutting through the tear gas haze, protesters fleeing as news spread. "Riot killed the Pooh kid," a lie pinning it on Darius. He sank to the bench, the cold seeping into his bones, Frank's blood, Khalil's blood, Reggie's blood, a river of loss drowning him. The USB burned in his sock, a ghost of a win, but what did it matter? Khalil was dying, maybe dead, and Voss had vanished, her machine grinding him down, bloodier, deadlier. He punched the wall, knuckles splitting, and thought of Lena's bakery, the bricks, the tape, every blow she'd landed. She'd lost the bench, lost the street, and still she stood, her allies a chaos engine shredding his fight. The guard tossed him a rag. "Clean up!" And he wiped Khalil's blood slow, the stain spreading, knowing this was her peak. A warlord flexing through death and lies. He'd exposed her fortune, shaken her core, and she'd struck with a precision. That broke him, not just at him, but at everyone he'd sworn to save. The cell door clanged, a shadow passing, and he leaned back, the fire in his gut dimming, a vow struggling to hold. She'd pay, for Khalil, for Reggie, for Frank, for every soul she'd crushed. The night deepened, the jail silent but for his. Breathing, and he stared at the ceiling, the taste of triumph gone, replaced by a dread that gnawed deeper. She'd drawn blood again, the deepest yet, and he'd make her bleed back, whatever it took. Darius Coleman sat in the Harrowville jail cell, Khalil's blood crusting on his hands, the USB in his sock a cold weight against his ankle as the fluorescent buzz mocked his breaking spirit. The bomb threat chaos still echoed, Khalil's chest, wound a fresh scar in his mind, the boy clinging to life in a hospital bed 3 miles away while Voss slipped free. He paced, boots scuffing the concrete, the fire in his gut a flicker now, buried under Frank's death, Reggie's murder, and this latest blow. The guard, the lanky kid, slipped him a whispered update at dawn. He's critical, not dead yet, and Darius clung to that thread, a lifeline in the dark. He'd exposed her millions, shaken her throne, and she'd turned it into a slaughterhouse, pinning it on him. By noon, the jail buzzed with rumors, deputies muttering about a manhunt, and Darius knew he couldn't stay caged. He bribed the guard again, his last $10. "Unlock it tonight." And the kid nodded, eyes darting. At midnight, the lock clicked, the door creaking open, and Darius bolted, a shadow in the humid night, his 6-foot frame ducking through alleys, the USB his only weapon. He hitched a ride with a trucker 5 miles out, a grizzled man who didn't ask questions. and pieced together Voss's escape. Whispers from the jail pointing to a private ranch 30 miles west, Grayson's bolt hole where she'd hide. He crashed in a ditch at dawn, the trucker gone and trekked the rest. Boots sinking in mud, the sun clawing to 95 degrees Fahrenheit, sweat stinging the cut on his palm. By dusk, he found it, a sprawling estate behind barbed wire, Voss's black car glinting in the drive. He tipped the feds from a payphone 2 miles back. "She's there, move now," and watched from a ridge as sirens wailed, agents swarming the ranch, their dark suits stark against the dusk. Live on a Dallas news chopper feed. They dragged her out, her silver hair wild, her blazer torn, handcuffs gleaming as she spat at the camera. Darius exhaled, leaning against a tree, the bark rough against his back, a moment of victory cutting through the haze. Khalil might live, Voss might fall. Then the twist hit. His phone, scavenged from a dumpster, buzzed with a text from Paul. "She pinned the bomb on you, warrant out." Cops swarmed his last known spot, the flophouse, and he ran, bullets grazing his arm as he dove into a ditch, blood soaking his sleeve, the sting sharp but ignored. Khalil flatlined that night, the hospital calling Tanya as Darius hid, her wail echoing in his mind from miles away, a sound he'd never unhear. Voss cackled from custody on the news. "He'll rot before I do." Her voice a blade through the static, and Darius's world burned again. The USB useless, the feds her pawns now. He stumbled through the dark, the ranch raid a mirage, justice, slipping through his fingers like sand. She'd turned his tip into a trap, framing him as the bomber, Khalil's death a weight she'd slung on his shoulders. He hid in a safe house, a shack 10 miles north, a hunter's retreat Paul had whispered about. The air thick with pine and rot, the USB still in his sock, a ghost of a win. He bandaged his arm with a torn shirt, blood crusting, and watched the news on a crackling TV. Voss's arrest replaying, her smirk intact, the feds buying her lie. Tanya's face flashed, sobbing outside the hospital. "He killed my boy." A lie she believed, the town believed, the world believed. Darius punched the wall, wood splintering, the cut on his palm splitting wider, and sank to the floor, replaying the raid, the bullets, Khalil's last breath. How had she flipped the feds? Who'd forged the warrant? He'd hunted her, cornered her, and she'd struck with a precision that broke him, not just at him, but at everyone he'd fought for. Back in Harrowville, the protest died. 50 voices, silenced by grief and doubt. The courthouse steps empty but for Tanya's vigil. A mother mourning a lie. He sat, the shack's silence pressing in, and thought of Lena's bakery, Reggie's body, Frank's blood, every blow she'd landed. She'd lost the bench, lost the ranch, and still she stood. Her allies a machine grinding him down, bloodier, deadlier. The TV flickered, a news anchor droning, Coleman armed and dangerous, and he laughed, a hollow sound, knowing he was a ghost now, hunted for her sins. He pulled the USB out, staring at it, Frank's last gift, Khalil's last hope, and wondered if it mattered, if anything did. The guard's whisper, "Not dead yet," was ash now, Khalil gone, and Voss free in spirit, her cuffs a prop. He leaned back, the floor creaking, the fire in his gut dimming, a vow struggling to hold. She'd pay for Khalil, for Reggie, for Frank, for every soul she'd crushed. The night deepened, crickets chirping outside, and he stared at the ceiling, the taste of victory gone, replaced by a dread that gnawed deeper. She'd drawn blood again, the deepest yet, and he'd make her bleed back, whatever it took. But first he had to survive, a fugitive in a war he'd never wanted. Darius Coleman crouched in the hunter's shack, the pine-scented air thick with rot. The USB in his hand, a cold relic of Frank's blood and Khalil's death, as the TV crackled with his face. Armed and dangerous, a lie that hunted him through the night. His arm throbbed, the bullet graze bandaged with a torn shirt, blood crusting under the fabric, but he ignored it, the fire in his gut a faint ember now, stoked by Voss's cackle from custody. "He'll rot before I do." He tipped the feds to her ranch, watched her dragged out in cuffs, thought he'd won, but she'd flipped it, pinning Khalil's death on him, turning him into a ghost in Harrowville's shadows. He needed more, something to bury her, and he knew where to look. By dawn he trekked south, 10 miles through brambles and mud, the sun clawing to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, sweat stinging the cut on his palm as he reached Voss's mansion, a hulking beast of brick and glass on the town's edge, guarded now only by silence. He slipped through a broken window, glass crunching under his boots, the air inside cool and stale, reeking of old money and older hate. He moved fast, 6 feet of shadow weaving through marble halls, past portraits of Voss's stern-faced kin, her silver hair a constant in every frame. He found her study, a fortress of oak and secrets, and pried open a safe behind a bookshelf, the lock yielding to a crowbar he'd scavenged from the shack. Inside, recordings glowed, cassettes labeled with dates and names, a treasure trove of her sins, her voice crackling on one he played, "Pay the feds, keep me clean," a bribe, to escape the ranch raid. His pulse hammered, a grin tugging at his lips. This was it, the dagger to her heart. He stuffed them in a bag, rigged his phone to a hotspot from a neighbor's signal, and streamed them online, millions watching as Voss's empire crumbled, her voice confessing to feds, to Grayson, to Lyle Trent's kills. The Dallas Post picked it up, headlines screaming, "Judges' tapes expose decades of corruption," and the feds turned, reopening her case, her cuffs tightening from prop to prison. Darius leaned against the desk, the study's silence broken by his ragged breathing, victory tasting sharp for the first time since the bank statement rattled her throne. He thought he'd won, Khalil's death avenged, Reggie's blood honored, Frank's sacrifice redeemed. Then the floor creaked, a shadow looming in the doorway, and he spun, facing a deputy, Voss's son, Trent Voss, 35, with her icy eyes and a sheriff's star glinting on his chest. "She's free tomorrow," Trent snarled, gun drawn. "You're dead tonight," his voice a mirror of her venom, her blood running thick in his veins. Darius dove as shots rang out, bullets splintering the desk, glass shattering around him, his 6-foot frame rolling behind a couch as he clutched the bag. Trent advanced, boots thudding. "You burned her, now I burn you," and Darius lunged, tackling him, the gun skittering across the marble. They grappled, fists slamming flesh, Trent's badge cutting Darius's cheek, blood mixing with sweat as he disarmed him, pinning the deputy's arm with a knee. Sirens wailed outside, red and blue flashing through the broken window. Feds or locals, he couldn't tell, and he bolted, bag in hand, leaving Trent sprawled, gasping, "You're done." Darius stumbled into the night, the mansion fading behind him, the recordings live, millions still watching. But his name was Mudd, a fugitive framed for bombs and death. His life a target now, not just from Voss, but her kin. He hid in a ditch, 2 miles out, the air humid and buzzing with mosquitoes, his arm bleeding fresh, the cut on his palm weeping as he replayed the fight, Trent's gun, her voice on the tapes. How had Trent known he'd hit the mansion? Who'd tipped him off? He'd exposed her to the world, turned her allies against her, and she'd struck back through her son, a vengeance that didn't need her hands to draw blood. Back in Harrowville, the news looped, Voss's arrest tightening, feds raiding Grayson's offices, Lyle Trent nabbed in a bar 50 miles east, her machine cracking under the tape's weight. Tanya sat by Khalil's grave, a fresh mound 3 days old, her vigil, silent now, believing Darius's fight killed her boy, a lie she'd carried to her own end. He sat in the ditch, mud caking his boots, the USB and tapes his only shield, and watched the sky lighten, the fire in his gut flaring, not dimming, a vow hardening. She'd pay, not just her, but Trent, for Khalil, for Reggie, for Frank, for every soul they'd crushed. The sirens faded, the night stretching thin, and he stared at the horizon, the taste of victory souring, replaced by a hunger for something final. He'd drawn her blood at last, her empire ash, but Trent's gun, her eyes in his face, promised more. A war not over, but shifting, deadlier. He stood, bag slung over his shoulder, a ghost in the dawn, knowing he'd exposed her, but at a cost that broke him, his life a thread now, hunted by her legacy. Darius Coleman trudged through the dawn, the bag of recordings slung over his shoulder, mud caking his boots as he limped away from the ditch, the bullet graze on his arm pulsing with every step. The tapes had hit the world like a thunderclap, millions watching Voss's empire crumble, her voice confessing bribes and murders on every screen from Dallas to DC, feds raiding her allies, Trent's gun still warm in his memory. He'd slept an hour in a barn 5 miles from her mansion, hay sticking to his blood-crusted shirt, the USB and cassettes his lifeline now, a fugitive's proof he wasn't the monster they claimed. By noon, he hit a gas station, a dingy box, 10 miles north, and cleaned up in a grimy bathroom, splashing water on his face. The cut on his palm weeping red as he stared into a cracked mirror, eyes sunken but sharp. He pawned a watch for $20, bought a burner phone and checked the news. Voss's trial set for today, expedited by the tape's firestorm, Grayson and Lyle Trent in cuffs, her machine imploding. He hitchhiked back to Harrowville, a trucker, dropping him a mile out, and limped into court, the limestone beast looming under a sun clawing to 98 degrees Fahrenheit, sweat stinging his wounds. The gallery buzzed, packed with reporters and stragglers, Tanya's seat empty, her grief a shadow he'd never outrun. Voss sat in the dock, her silver hair tamed into a bun, her blazer swapped for a jumpsuit, but her smirk lingered, icy eyes locking onto him as he slipped in, 6 feet of defiance cloaked in exhaustion. He'd won, hadn't he? The tapes sealed. It her legacy, Ash, justice clawing out of the dirt. The new judge took the bench, a broad man named Ellis Voss, her cousin, his jaw square like hers, his gaze soft until it wasn't, and Darius's gut twisted, a flicker of dread cutting through. The haze. The feds presented the recordings, her voice crackling through the room. "Pay them, keep me clean," jurors gasping, a woman with braids nodding slow, the weight of 30 years spilling out. Trent testified from custody, his star dulled, swearing she'd ordered Reggie's hit, Frank's ambush, Khalil's chaos, his voice flat but damning. Darius stood, voice raw. "She framed me, killed them, it's all there." And Ellis nodded, pen scratching, the room holding its breath. Victory loomed, sharp and real, closure for Khalil's grave, Reggie's river, Frank's alley. Then Ellis smirked, a slow curl mirroring hers, and dropped the hammer. Technicality on the warrant, evidence inadmissible. His voice smooth as oil, dismissing her charges with a flick of his wrist. The room erupted, reporters shouting, jurors gaping, Darius lunging. "This is a fix." But deputies hauled him back, cuffs snapping on as Voss stood free, spitting at him. "You're still nothing, boy." The words landed like a brick through glass, his world flipping upside down. The tapes, the blood, the fight, all ash in her cousin's hands. She strutted out, her silver hair glinting under the lights, the courthouse doors swinging wide, reporters swarming as she laughed. "Justice bends for me." Darius was dragged to a holding cell. Khalil's death pinned on him now, warrants piling up. Bomber, murderer, fugitive, lies stacking like bricks on his chest. He sat, the concrete cold, the buzz of fluorescence mocking him, replaying Ellis's smirk, her spit, the tape's useless echo. How had she pulled this? Who'd greased Ellis? He'd exposed her to millions, broken her machine, and she'd slipped free, her blood on the bench saving her skin. Then the chaos hit. A screech of tires outside a protester's car, a beat-up sedan from the rally days ramming hers as she crossed the lot, flames erupting in a roar that shook the walls. Darius stumbled to the cell window, bars biting his palms, and stared, stunned as fire engulfed her. Her silver hair a torch, her scream swallowed by the blaze. The crowd froze, reporters scrambling, deputies shouting, and he watched, jaw slack, as justice twisted into vengeance, a vigilante's torch where the law had failed. She was gone, ash and bone, her smirk silenced at last, but not by him, not by the tapes, not by the fight he'd bled for. He sank back, the cell spinning, the fire's glow flickering in his mind. Khalil's blood, Reggie's throat, Frank's alley, all avenged in a way he'd never planned. Ellis stormed out, face pale, deputies swarming the lot, but Darius was cuffed, a ghost in their eyes, the bomber who'd sparked this, a lie that stuck. He slipped the USB to Paul through the bars. "Keep it safe," and bolted when a riot broke out, protesters clashing with cops, the cell door pried open. In the melee, he ran 10 miles north, a shadow in the dusk, the fire's heat a memory on his skin, knowing the war never ends. Not for him, not for Harrowville, Voss was dead, her empire dust, but his name was mud, his life a thread, hunted by her legacy, by Ellis, by a town that believed he'd burned it all. He hid in a barn, hay prickling his wounds, and stared at the sky, the taste of victory gone, replaced by a hollow ache. Justice a vigilante's flame, not his hands. She'd drawn blood. To the end, and he'd survived, broken but alive, a ghost carrying the cost. The saga of Darius Coleman versus Judge Marjorie Voss reveals stark truths about justice, resilience, and the cost of fighting systemic racism. First, it shows that power, when corrupt, doesn't bow easily. Voss wielded her influence like a weapon, twisting laws and lives with impunity, proving that entrenched bigotry often hides behind robes and gavels. Darius's journey teaches us that standing up isn't just about winning. It's about enduring, even when every victory crumbles into ash. His relentless pursuit, despite losing Khalil, Reggie, and Frank, underscores a second lesson. Courage isn't free. Each blow, bricks, arson, murder, tested his spirit, yet he pressed on, a testament to the strength found in defiance. Third, the story exposes the fragility of trust. Khalil's family turned on Darius, swayed by Voss's lies, showing how racism fractures communities from within. Finally, the shocking end, with Voss's fiery demise, hammers home a bitter truth. Justice can be a vigilante's torch when courts fail, leaving scars on those who fight for it. Darius emerged a ghost, his name muddied, his losses uncounted, but his fight lit a spark, proof that even broken, one voice can shake an empire. What does this leave us with? A call to question, to resist, to remember that the war against injustice is long, messy, and worth every wound. So what hit you hardest? Darius's unbreakable will or Voss's downfall? Drop a comment with your take. Hit like if this stirred you. Subscribe for more raw truths, and share to spread the fight. Thanks for riding this roller coaster with us. Here's to courage that burns brighter than any flame.